Only one clause for this one, but not so easy. Remember the sentence we've seen in Spirited Away. 買い物は隣町に行く. It is more or less the same. The first wa is a contrast wa, so you have to translate it by as for to unlock the sentence. Never forget that if you're stuck in a sentence with a weird wa, you have to translate it by as for. So literally, you would have, as for the interview of that time, Mr. Sato was the guest. Also, remember that toki can be used to mean when, but can also be used as a pure noun to mean time, moment, period. And we've seen that sonotoki means that time, that moment. So sonotoki no interview, the interview of that time. Then you have a very long sentence. So for this one, I recommend that you add the brackets whatever happens. You have 4 clauses, and now we have to find in what order we can translate them. So first, you have a ga right in the middle. So this ga after a verb, it's the ga that means but, not the subject particle, okay? Ga after a verb means but. And you know that this ga works the same way as in English. You don't have to invert the clauses when you translate. And you don't even have to place it at the beginning of the first clause. But remember what I said before. When you have to invert the clauses, it means that the clauses are not independent. They are kind of embedded in each other. Well then, when it works just like in English, when you don't have to invert anything, it means that the clauses are not embedded. They are independent. Therefore, you can add a slash because you will have a big cut in your sentence. 2 independent parts that you will translate one after the other. So it simplifies the translation even more. To simplify things, you can just remember that when you have ga or kedo, you can add a slash and translate in order. And then you translate bit after bit. So here you have toki after a verb. So this one will mean when. Remember to place the when at the beginning in English. So clause plus toki equals when plus clause. So when I do an interview. Second bit, itsumo, iroiro na shitsumon, so an adjective, iroiro na shitsumon, various question. Then you have o, so you know that you will have to translate it after the verb suru. So I always ask various questions. Know that in Japanese you can use the verb suru with many nouns. So you don't even need to use the verb to ask. Suru is enough. And of course, here you can invert the clauses in your translations. You can say, when I do an interview, I always ask various questions, or I always ask various questions when I do an interview. So, we can then say that in Japanese you have 3 kinds of clauses. Clauses that are strictly embedded, and that we will call SE clauses. The translation will always be inverted. You have then embedded clauses, but not so strictly embedded, which we call NSE clauses. In that case, the translation can be inverted or not. And finally, you have not embedded clauses, and for this one, you can translate in order, and you even have to translate in order. So in Japanese, for embedded clauses, so SE and NSE, the main clause is always at the end. I've told you this rule many times. It's very important to remember it. But the new thing that we can add to this rule today is that in English, when you have embedded clauses, either the main clause has to be at the beginning, SE clauses, either you can switch them around as you want, NSE clauses. 日本に行くと思います。I think I will go to Japan. You see that? You have to invert the translation. You can say, I will go to Japan. I think it is impossible. So here it is mandatory to invert the two clauses in English. Then a not strictly embedded clause. インタビューするときは質問します。We've seen it. You can invert them or not. I ask questions when I do an interview. When I do an interview, I ask questions. And then not embedded clauses. 質問しますが、時間がありませんでした。I ask questions, but I didn't have time. And here you see that you have to translate in order. You can't invert the clauses because like the meaning would completely change. And so of course your job will be to spot what kind of clause you have in your sentences. But you'll see that of course with time you'll just do it naturally. It's just to help you with the Japanese syntax. Well, anyway, let's go back to our sentence. So then you have んですが. So the んです that gives an explanatory feel to the previous clauses, the first part of the sentence, and then が, so but. And we get to the second part. Same thing as the first part. You have a clause plus ので. So in English, it would be since plus clause. So since I didn't have time. なかった comes from ある. It's the plain past negation. So I didn't have time. And then the final bit with しかありません. So to have no other choice than. We then have I didn't have any other choice than to make it simple. You thus have I always ask various questions when I do an interview, but I didn't have any other choice than to make it simple because I didn't have time. And you see, if you translate bit after spotting the clauses and the way they work together, the sentence will eventually be formed. You will manage to translate it. So never try to translate the whole thing in one go. Take your time. Next sentence is quite simple. You have てしまう after the verb to indicate that you regret it. But it's impossible to translate in English anyway. And you have に after the adjective 速やか. So, once again, に after an e adjective indicates that the adjective is used as an adverb. So it works with the verb to end promptly or to end quickly. You see, you add ly after the adjective to make it an adverb. Next one is quite a tough sentence too. So if maybe you didn't manage to do it or you're not sure that your translation is correct, try to press pause and to redo it once again. So first, we underline the verbs to spot the clauses, and we see that we have three clauses. The first one ends with ba, and you know that it's not mandatory to invert them, because when we had a sentence with ba in Spirited Away, we translated in order. So it's just like toki or node. So for the moment, you can translate in order, no problem. So if I have another opportunity, or if there is another opportunity, then you have a te form. For the moment, we've seen that you should translate it by and, so no inversion here. So you translate the next bit. I will interview him once again, and then the final bit with a te mitai. So te miru plus tai. I want to try to. So literally, I want to try to talk to him without haste. But don't you think that we should change something in this sentence? Think a bit about it, about what you would say. So yes, it would be more natural to say, if I have another opportunity, I'd like to interview him once again and to talk with him without haste. So this is a problem that you will mainly encounter with the te form. The te form is fixed. It cannot be conjugated. Therefore, it happens quite often that the tense of the main clause has to be applied on the verb with the te form. You see that here, the te mitai applies to the verb hanasu, but also to the verb interview suru. So this whole part of the sentence then works together. The te form is a bit special, so it kind of follows its own rules. But we'll study this later, don't worry. It's fine if it confuses you, it's the trickiest part of the Japanese syntax. And the te form is really complicated actually, so don't worry, we spend lots of time on the te form. And so that's it. Remember that it's very important that you don't rush. You have to force yourself to be thorough. This way you will avoid big mistranslations, and this is what will get your brain used to the syntax. So for the moment, you just have to get used to the two kinds of inversions you'll find in Japanese. When you have to invert the clauses when needed, and when you have to place the introducing word of a clause at the beginning, when in Japanese, it's almost always on the verb or after the verb. If you get used to this, then you'll unlock the next level. So for the moment, focus on this, okay? It's fine if you don't completely get what I explained about the embedded clauses, etc., etc. Just get used to the inversions, and you will see that it will become so much easier after that. So of course, you can redo and redo and redo these exercises until you completely figure out why we translate this way and until it becomes quite natural for you. It's a very good training, so don't hesitate to do it. Okay, so see you next video for the rest of the answers.